wait 2 to 3 minutes and then we start.
Okay, I see Coqueto and Alice. Is Elvis going to join?
He's here.
I'm here.
Oh,
Hello.
I can't see you. There you are. Okay, super. Super. Do.
Hi, everybody that is just joining. We are waiting 2 or 3 minutes for others to join, and we will start at 2:05 sharp. Thank you for joining.
هذا كلام فارغ ويمحق البركة ذاته. صايم عليك. وين هم فين البنات؟
Okay, I think that we can start. I ask all participants, if possible, to mute their microphones. Thank you so much for being here. Good afternoon, morning, or night, everybody, and welcome. It is a real pleasure to see you all here joining today. I will not take long because I have to say that I am very eager to start this conversation, but I want to explain a little bit why we're having this webinar. So today is part of the preparation for the GDC Africa Regional Forum, which will take place on 26th March in Nairobi, and it's led by our partners, Nuru Trust and Youth for SDG Africa. No, Youth for SDG Kenya. I always say it wrong. Sorry, Diana. But please don't miss the forum. It will be an amazing exchange, and we will share the information to the event page so you can take a look. But it will be really an amazing exchange. But anyway, these conversations are an opportunity to start surfacing ideas, experiences, and lessons from across the region before we meet in person here in Nairobi. Our focus today is, as you know, elections, youth participation, and democratic accountability. Elections are often described as the cornerstone of democracy, but we know they can also be moments of tension, pressure, when civic space can narrow, disinformation spread, and democratic institutions are very tested. But at the same time, there are also moments when civic energy becomes particularly visible. So across Africa, young people are playing an increasingly important role in democratic life, from voter education and election monitoring to digital activism and accountability initiatives. Young civic actors are not only participating in democracy, but they are helping defend and shape it. And we are very fortunate today to have wonderful voices with us, Alice, Koketsu, Elvis, who will share their perspective and experiences. And I am very proud to say that all these voices are from the GDC. And I am even more proud to have this conversation moderated by McDonald Uwanika, who is also part of the GDC and who I like to briefly introduce. So McDonald is the Executive Director of Accountability Lab East and Southern Africa, where he leads the regional strategy, partnerships, and programs that strengthen accountability and support civic actors across the region. He is originally from Zimbabwe. He has long been engaged in civil society leadership, democracy advocacy, and political analysis across Southern Africa. So McDonald, thank you very much for being with us today. And with that, I will hand the floor over to you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Elisanda, for that introduction. And good afternoon, colleagues, and welcome to what promises to be a very powerful conversation. I think that the background has already been given, but I think it would be remiss of me not to add a few points to what Elisanda has already placed on the table. And we are basically having this conversation around elections, youth participation, and democratic accountability at a very, very difficult time. And I think that we all know this. We all know what is happening to democratic processes across the globe. And we also know that elections themselves went through a stand test in 2024, which others had declared the year of elections, where the bulk of the world's population, I think, was going for elections that year. And not least here on the African continent, there were many elections which produced mixed results at the end of the day. There was a lot of promise that came out of South Africa, Botswana, and a few other places, but also a lot of challenges over the last 2 years that have emerged from elections in Mozambique, elections in Tanzania just recently, which really gets us worried about both the place of elections and what they mean for Africa's young people and the continent in general, when 52% of us, who are the majority on the continent, are living in places that are less than democratic. We go through elections, but the elections themselves are challenged. And young people are placed at risk in those particular elections. So it is important for us to have this reflection about where we are going, both as a continent and as a people. Some have even argued that where we are at this particular point in time, in terms of the issue of democratic elections on the continent, is that we are back to the levels where we were at in 2000. So we are moving forward in terms of time. We are counting the years, and we recently celebrated a new year. But in terms of democratic trajectories, it seems we are moving backwards. I don't think that any one of us needs some reminding around how successful coups have been, especially in West Africa over the last couple of years. And not just coups that are military-led, but even constitutional coups. We know of many examples of governments who are attempting to subvert the will of the people through amending constitutions. So the country where I'm sitting right now, the president is attempting to extend terms of office. We have seen other people removing these terms completely. So we are sitting with all of that as a continent and as a people. But one of the bright spots that have emerged is indeed what young people have done and how they have responded to some of the democratic challenges that are visiting us as a continent. From Morocco to Senegal, Madagascar, Kenya, Tanzania, and Nigeria, we have seen potent examples of what young people can do when they decide to enter the conversation beyond elections, especially on the premise that elections themselves are betraying them and not working properly. But even where elections are concerned, I'm excited, Alice, to have you as part of the conversation, because I am half Zambian. I know it was said that I'm originally from Zimbabwe. I'm in Zimbabwe and I'm Zimbabwean, but I'm originally from Zambia. And one of the powerful demonstrations of youth power came in the last Zambian elections. Now, we know Zambia is going for elections again today, but in that election, they were able to do amazing things, turn out in record-breaking numbers and stuff. So there's still space for youth participation where elections are concerned. But at the same time, we know that these are moments of vulnerability for young people, not just as participants in the electoral process, but precisely because, number one, they are the majority on the continent, and when voting takes place, it is you that are expected to be participating in that particular process. But they are also at the front line of electoral engagements. They mobilize voters. They are the bulk of the voters themselves. They lead voter education. But at the same time, the regimes that are presiding over our countries and our continent respond in ways that are less than friendly. They close civic space, they shut down digital platforms and so on and so forth. So I will not waste people's times by getting into this, because I've got a more than able panel to take us through some of these issues. And I would like to introduce them.
Like
Uh,
as much as possible.
Starting,
Like
sorry, Farouk, can you mute your mic? So I would like to introduce the panel that is going to take us through today's conversation, starting with Koketso Moeti. Koketso has had an illustrious career in civic activism, working basically at the intersection of governance, communication, and people power. She's the founding executive director of Amandla.mobi, which leads campaigns that build real power for Black people, with a particular focus on low-income Black women. Her work challenges injustice by bringing communities together at critical moments to take targeted, coordinated, and strategic action to bring about change. She has participated in a number of prestigious fellowships, with the most recent one, if Google is correct, being the Charles F. Kettering Fellowship in 2025. Joining Koketso will be Alice, who I have already acknowledged as my fellow countrywoman or home girl. Alice is the Voice and Democracy Manager at Restless Development in Zambia, where she leads youth-focused democracy governance programming with a focus on strategic partnerships, policy influence. Her work centers on strengthening youth civic participation, supporting youth-led civic society, and advancing feminist leadership. She is connected to the international youth governance spaces, most notably through the AU-EU Youth Voices Lab. And last but certainly not least is my brother Elvis Sitati. Elvis is the founder and chief executive officer of Oamuzi Foundation, where he leads a team that is dedicated to amplifying voices of marginalized groups, including young women, young people, women, and people with disabilities, through leveraging technology and real-time data. He has a solid foundation in business leadership and has earned a reputation as an exceptional and passionate leader within the corporate sector. His expertise lies in orchestrating effective team dynamics, crafting strategic frameworks, and driving successful executions across various sectors. So this is the panel that is going to be leading us today. And so that we turn it into more of a conversation, I will allow this panel to give us their opening remarks, perhaps 2 minutes. It's just broad reflections around the question, and then we can have questions that are a bit more targeted before we bring people in to ask questions. So we can start with Koketso. I know that it is a big topic, but perhaps your reflections around this conversation of elections, youth participation, and democratic accountability in 2 minutes.
I think we were all very horrified when we saw what unfolded in Tanzania following the elections last year. In the lead up to the elections, major opposition candidates were barred from running, and election sites were quite as voters boycotted. And one of the things I remember watching was the violence that would follow, right? This was following a government-imposed curfew, shutdown of transports, markets, the internet, newspapers. We all watched in horror as the police fired live ammunition into the crowds. As people died, more than 200 young people were charged with treason. But one of the things I so clearly remember was footage of the chants of people saying, Hatutaki CCM, we don't want Chama Chama Pinduzi. I think there was a vigilance that was reflected in that moment, right? And I think beyond, we often tend to limit democracy to the idea that it is only and solely about ballots and the election. But across the world, we are seeing that electoral moments and electoral outcomes, those who win elections, are actually challenging democracy, right? Following their wins. And I think there was something about the vigilance, the bravery, and the courage of Tanzanian youth in that moment that was such a solid reminder that there is a beyond the election period, and we must be vigilant before, during, and after. But also that the consequences of what happens during elections are very, very far reaching, even beyond that period, and have a massive impact beyond the process of putting the ballot in the paper or whatever forms the election take. So that is the spirit that I'm bringing into the conversation. It is about civic space, democracy as a whole, with elections only being one part of it. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Kokezo, for those opening remarks. We'll get back to some of the pointers that you have laid down on the table for us as we progress with the conversation. But for now, perhaps we can just get broad reflections from Alice around today's conversation. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you so much. And very quickly, I looked at your last name and thought, is this my person? And I'm sure you know in Zambia, Lewanika is the name of our chief, so I'll be referring to you as chief from now on. Really quickly, I think we've set the scene about the present and recent events, but more so for me to take us back to the past a little bit, right? The data shows that for us to have inclusive, equitable societies, our democratic processes play a very big part. But our history shows us that at the heart of all of that has been young people, right? With South Africa and Youth Day and the role that they played in making sure that the electoral process is equitable. In Zambia, our first president, our founding president, was 40 when he became president, and his cabinet, a good number, were below 30, right? So those are very good examples that we aren't getting away from the power of youth in terms of electoral processes. And for me in this discussion, I really want to talk about how that power operationalizes itself, how regardless of oppression and barriers, there's no running away from it, especially that it's so enshrined in our history, and how if we tap into it, it's not anything to be scared of, right? If we tap into it, we can be successful. Most of our countries today, especially within the continent, exist because of young people before, and they'll go forward because of young people now. So that's really where I'm framing this discussion today. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Alice. And again, we'll come back to some of the issues that you have placed on the table. I think it's interesting that you revisit the history and tell us about how a 40-year-old was able to take over the state and preside over it. But in today's world, I mean, the last elections in Malawi produced an 85-year-old president. The US president is 80-something years old. Zimbabwean president, 80-something year old. So it's interesting how these people in their youth were able to take charge and responsibility, but perhaps are doing all they can to stop today's young people from doing what they did in the past. I'm hoping we can revisit part of that conversation as we discuss some of the things that you have clearly stated an interest in pursuing. Elvis, your broad thoughts before we get to specifics on today's conversation.
Thank you so much. First of all, receive greetings from Kenya. It's a pleasure to be here. Even as we are having this conversation, one thing that is coming really strong is the power of technology and internet, because we are having this discussion with people from all across the globe. And even as we talk about this, we also have to acknowledge the power and the power of social media, which has been able to make the world into a global village. And we've seen the power of technology in terms of just communication, mobilization, digital activism. Right now, it's being done solely on social media, and even civic education. People have taken the chance or the mandate of educating each other using social media. But even as we talk about this, we've also seen the downside of it. Talk about the shrinking of civic space, talk about the misinformation and disinformation that is now on a very rampant rise. With the advent of AI, we are talking about deepfakes. So, we also, for as much as we are saying, technology has come in and it has really made our work or our lives easier, we can also see the downside of it, which now which also I'm just really going to talk about. And being at the center of technology and having my own civic tech platform, I feel like now this is the right time for us to have this conversation, and also it's high time for us to be able to engage and say, as Africa, it's time for us to be builders and not just consumers. So happy to be here and looking forward to having a really impactful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Elvis. And indeed, in today's world, we cannot have a conversation around participation, around engagement, without talking about the digital space. And we are going to get a bit more into that. But perhaps to start off some of the more elaborate reflections, we can go back to Koketso. And I know that you work at the intersection of this online and offline organizing and mobilizing. But perhaps we go back to where you started the conversation around civic space. In what ways have you seen civic space evolving across the region? If you were to point to certain pressures, I know you already indicated some of the things that were taking place in Tanzania, but at a broad level, are there broader pressures that are shaping democratic participation in accountability on the continent from where you sit?
Absolutely. And I'm so glad that you made a differentiation between online and offline. I think sometimes when I hear people still talk about in the digital space and in real life, right, it shocks me because the consequences of what happened online impact us in person, right? And I suppose that will be my starting point, that digital tech connectivity has become an essential part of most people's lives. And these new technologies are here to stay, and we have to observe them with a critical eye. And so, this growing adoption of digital technologies over the last 2 decades has really enabled new forms of political participation and have extended civic space beyond the physical realm. And so, we see dual things happening. I suppose one place that I can give just immediate examples on this expansion of civic space is the Occupy Nigeria, InSARS movements, and the Bring Back Our Girls campaigns, which are quite notable examples. So what we have also seen, though, which Elvis has pointed to, is that in response to the use of these technologies to open up civic space, reactionary actors, whether government or corporate entities, have tried to close them. And we've seen these tactics before. Internet shutdowns, the expansion of surveillance, and targeted mis and disinformation campaigns. Not so long ago, an analysis of the state of digital rights in 10 African countries by the African Digital Rights Network, for instance, identified 65 examples of citizens opening up democratic spaces online, but more than 100 of governments closing that online civic space. And so when it comes to elections, much more specifically, we have had challenges when it comes to elections weather, violence, and many other range of things. But we do have to understand that technology has enabled this to be scaled at a big level, right? So what we are seeing is technology being used to manipulate voter perception, silence opposition, and restrict access to information. And the risk with how elections are often used to justify this clampdown on civic space, and whether it is laws that are shifted just before an election, we must know that in some instances, those laws are deemed to stay well beyond the election and don't end up only impacting the online space, right? And have consequences for organizing even offline. And so that, I think, has become a defining point of what is making up civic space today and what is enabling or minimizing democratic participation and accountability. Thanks.
Thanks a lot for those reflections. I mean, given what you have placed on the table, how then should we understand, electoral periods within this wider landscape of repression that you have placed on the table, but also resilience on the other end? You have talked about technology being an enabler, but it is also being used by other people who are using it to misinform or to manage populations. How should we read electoral periods and motivate for citizen action? If you've got concrete examples around how people have leveraged these technologies, I think it would be good to hear about them also.
I think a couple of examples that would immediately come to mind, right, is even in the face of internet shutdowns, we have seen people document abuses, whether at election time or outside, and what they have done with the documentation of these abuses is to try and seek accountability. A massive example for me is during the NSARS protests, actually at the Lekki massacre. What happened is there are a group of people, and I want to name specifically one example is DJ Switch, who started live streaming what was going on as the lights were shut down and the police opened fire. And I remember when she live streamed, she opened by saying that they let us show the world what is happening, otherwise they will say we killed ourselves. And what has since happened between then is there was support from all of this documentation that was put together through various investigations to show it did indeed happen. And why that matters was, if you remember, in the immediate aftermath of the massacre, the government denied that this was happening and even went as far as attempting to claim that the protesters were lying and are spreading mis and disinformation, right, to make it seem as this has happened. But this documentation was then used to attempt to hold government accountable. And one outcome of that was a panel of inquiry that then subsequently followed, right, did find that the massacre had indeed happened and the government was liable for that. So while we haven't gotten full accountability, it is just one example of people using the ability to document what is happening to both pursue accountability from the perpetrators thereof, but also to make sure it stays in the archive of our memory, right? The archive of our memory around the injustice that is happening, and develop mechanisms through which we can ensure that such incidents no longer occur. And I think that is very, very significant.
Thanks a lot, Alice. Sorry, thanks a lot, Koketso. I was thinking about going to Alice next, and I will do that. But point out to a number of things that I hope Alice can be able to take up. You mentioned memorialization, so keeping these things in the archives of our memories. You talked about DJ Switch and live streaming. All of these point to not just physical battles taking place around democracy on the streets, but they also talk to a narrative battle that is clearly there and is taking place. And perhaps to start us off, Alice, you can posit some thoughts around how these narratives, the way that we've been framing these narratives can either be perpetuated. Are we doing it the right way? How can we frame conversations around elections, youth participation, and democratization, knowing that it is both a narratives and cultural battle at the moment? And then also just try to quickly differentiate for us how young people, even though some of them do not self-identify as frontline democratic actors, are acting the role, and what differentiates how they are doing it now with how it has been done in the past, in the hope that we can be able to get some nodes and clear connections between that past, which you referred to, and what is currently taking place at the moment as part of framing future practice.
Great, thank you. So I 100% agree. I think a lot of young people wouldn't call themselves frontliners per se. They're just young. It's really just the power of youth that we can try and quantify and operationalize, but it's really just an essence, I think, that comes with it, not to sound any corny. But speaking about the youth actors and then later going into around the narratives, maybe just to give some background and like some data around how young people present themselves in elections, right? So when we look at data from Afrobarometer, we find that 64% of young people prefer democracy over any other form of government. But young people 18 to 35 still trail behind in terms of voting compared to older citizens. But that doesn't mean that they're disengaged in democracy per se. Part of it is lack of institutional trust, democratic systems that don't really work to adopt them, and also just how they present their work. So in earlier discussions, we've been saying that, the beautiful thing about youth engagement during elections is that it extends beyond voting itself. It happens way before the electoral period and it continues way after. Across so many contexts, we see that peer-to-peer education online, that mobilization of first-time voters in Zambia currently, in some of the provinces, the highest record number of registrations for new voters, and also countering mis and disinformation, right? You're not going to take away their rights. And that's because they are highly connected through digital networks and their community groups and really see themselves as one and not individuals. But we recognize that this sometimes power and participation may not be likable to the powers that be, may present itself in a brush way. But that's because they face a lot of challenges, economic exclusion, in countries like Zambia and others. Just to even participate within elections, you need quite a lot of money in your pocket, limited representation in political parties as well. I don't believe we have more than 20 or even 10% of young people in parliament in Zambia already. So if at the highest level, you're not seeing that youth representation within a political party, what does that mean in terms of prioritizing reaching out to young people, right? But funny enough is using the tool of young people to help mobilize and help you vote is really there. And then also low trust in political institutions. So this really discourages young people from operating in the same traditional way, right? But I also think, not to sound a little bit corny and to go to the narratives part, I think it's because young people in elections, it's just so sincere. They are less likely to be aligned to political parties or voting alone, because at the end of the day, if you ask the average young person, it's that they just want their democracy to deliver a job with dignity, safe housing, for them to live their full potential. So they're not really, they can be ideological stances, yes, but they're not really interested in all the fluff and the stories and political narrative. It's really just, how can this process work for us to ensure that we all live a life of dignity and meaning as well? We find that they are more networked, and very innovative, regardless of these challenges. And the previous speaker, I think, alluded to that, and really focused on accountability and protecting our democratic space. Who can forget, in not this election, but in Malawi's last election of young people moving in the night with the polling, boxes on their heads. Or in Zambia in 2021, even though we had a power crisis with torches being there as the counting happened as well. So very passionate about holding that democratic space. So the real thing is that I think where they really differ is that the watchdogs, the custodians, right? They really hold this democracy. It's very precious. I think compared to most actors who really it's the day of voting, and are really, really passionate about safeguarding those democratic norms and also promoting like peaceful participation as well. So they really want to ensure that electoral processes remain transparent and credible. I think that's the biggest thing in terms of like differentiating youth actors in electoral processes to most traditional actors.
Thanks a lot, Alice. There are a number of things that that you stated that piqued my interest, and part of it, and perhaps you can reflect on this, is data. So I love data. I love Afrobarometer data especially, and I hope that more people can be able to get into the practice of gathering data and using data to inform what we act. But sometimes the data is not as clear as we might want it to be. So you made reference to Afrobarometer data that suggests that young people are still in favor of democracy, but that same data also says that these young people are very supportive of people like Ibrahim Traore, if those who are then elected through these so-called democratic processes do not deliver the things that you talked about, jobs, safe housing, beyond the fluff. So part of my challenge is how do we read that kind of data? I was looking at the data around trust in institutions just recently, and one of the countries that performs better than a lot of other countries on the African continent is actually Tanzania. Tanzanians trust their courts, about 88% of them, 79% of them trust their election management bodies, 82% trust their president, 84% trust the ruling party, and the opposition is not trusted at 45%. But we know what happened in Tanzania just recently. How do we how do we reconcile these things? We want data to drive how we think about these things, but clearly the data where Tanzania is concerned is at variance with the reality on the ground. If you reflect on some of the things that Koketso mentioned in her opening remarks. So there's no question there. So my questions, I think that's how do we reconcile these variances around these things, and what can we do, I guess, to strengthen our data collection and data sources in order to be properly informed about what is happening on the ground with regards to elections and democratization in general.
Okay, great. Is that the question now?
Yes,
Okay, great.
that
I
is.
would say a disclaimer is that I am not a data analyst, but I do, firstly, to go back in terms of the conflict that you mentioned, right? And that's why I said that for me, the best way I can say it is that there's a sincerity, like, to what young people want. And that's why I even said that they typically sometimes do not align to political parties. And I'm not shocked about the Ibrahim data because it's really about who can deliver it's really in its purest form. And I don't know how we can quantify that. It goes back to what I wanted to talk about in terms of the diversity of youth as well. I think we need to recognize that Africa is so vast, diverse, even within our countries as well. So maybe I like that Afrobarometer has more Africans leading the data as well. But maybe we need to, first is like we need to resource more. We need to resource more of our like data collection as well. We need to be able to reconcile those conflicts that we see popping up. And I think it's also just ensuring that we have more diversity in what we collect and the information that we are getting. So top line, that's what I would say. But also just to remember that youth actors are not your typical actors. There would be so many variations, the wind will change. And that's why, because at the end of the day, the sincerity is I want a stable economy, safe place, and to live a life of like quality. So who would deliver that? And maybe also just accept that because it's not as clean cut and put in a box, is that we may be surprised by what we get as well from that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot for those reflections. And my apologies for coming from left flank, since you have said you're not a data analyst. But I totally agree with you. And hopefully that's an ongoing conversation around how we can improve data sourcing, how we can be able also to improve the quality of data that we get, especially in repressive environments. Because if you're doing surveys in places that are less than democratic, people might just tell you what they think you want to hear. So how do we differentiate between those perceptions and reality as we move on? I like
Or
the
sorry,
fact.
or
Yeah.
places that have not experienced a democracy, right? I have colleagues who've been born and have had the same president as well. So asking me and asking them those questions would be very different.
Yeah, no, definitely. That is correct. And perhaps on that question of differentiation, you mentioned that young people are different. And then I remember reading an article, I think it was based on some experiences in Kenya by a professor out of Birmingham called Nick Chisman. And one of the arguments that he made was that, this reference to youth repression, youth action is not helpful because youth is not a category. Young people are diverse and stuff like that. But, if you can reconcile that diversity, I mean, how are we supposed to understand the experiences of young people, especially where electoral repression is concerned? And how does that differ from how an old man like myself experiences repression at the end of the day?
Great, thanks. You're still young at heart. So really quickly, the most important thing is that we need to like center young people as well. Part of like feminist principles is that we cannot speak for someone else's experience. And it goes back to everything that you've said, right? With like our data collection, who is collecting that data? Are we resourcing it in a diverse way that it's getting all of their opinions as well? And same for us, as much as possible as restless development. I think for the sake of like language and communicating, we leave it at we are powered by young people. But then specifically when we're discussing our programs, we really want to speak specifically to who we partner with, right? Whether it's young people, whether it's young women, young men, adolescent boys, adolescent girls, that really helps as well. People of different sexualities, as well as low income and high income. With elections, I would start with the biggest one. My feminist heart, of course, is that, first of all, with young women, we experience elections very differently. And for Zambia, this is where I get a little bit sad because young people as a whole voted the most, but young women beat everyone. Women as a whole, 51% voted in our last election, and that shows across different age groups. But our parliament is not even 25% women. It's less than 20. Imagine. So already you're seeing a system or electoral process, which I think a good standard of saying of you interacting with it is voting, but it doesn't shine back to you in that way. You don't see that representation, right? And that's the biggest barrier as well. You don't think it's for you. And then also the harassment, women participating in politics as well. We're currently running a program around women in mentorship. And the biggest hurdle that we want is like a lot of women want to participate in the civic spaces. They already do. They want to represent their fellow communities. But the harassment, the sexualized threats, the online abuse, reputational attacks, the biggest mistake you can make in Zambia is be a divorced woman running. But I think this is the first president you've had who's never been divorced. You can imagine all our presidents before have. Not that it's a stain, but apparently it is for women, right? And research from UN Women and other organizations has documented gender-based political violence increasingly occurs both offline and online within political parties and those structures, and then also your communities as well. So I think that's the biggest one in terms of how we operate in this system. Another one is also location as well, right? So first starting with physical location. If you are a young woman or man in a rural marginalized community, you face so many barriers. Really quickly, to just give a story, is in my past life, I worked in public health and we went to a remote community, and with the drama that comes with public health, we had these hard top vehicles because the terrain was very hard. I think about 5 of them. We get to the facility and the nurse in charge was saying that the people who are here are asking, is it time for elections? Because that's the only time people show up, right? During election period. Very sad. I mean, there was a giggle, but it's very sad. And it actually even shows that systems, electoral reforms, maybe it's because of infrastructure that is not there, and the like, are really more likely to sideline people in rural spaces. They have fewer opportunities to engage in civic spaces. If the infrastructure is not there to get to your remote village, when the parliament asks for citizen submissions for a bill on farming that would affect you, how will you get there, right? So that's also a bigger structure. Another one is also access to resources and digital spaces. For young people, because of all the structural barriers that they face, the digital space has really been a gift in mobilizing, in learning, in education as well. But we know during electoral periods, those same spaces become a place of repression. The internet is shut down. We've also signed into law some cybersecurity bills that threaten our civic space as well. And we even know that those will be used during our electoral period in Zambia. So in a lot of contexts, but specifically the context for a young person, internet disruptions and restrictions can further limit their access compared to intergenerational partners who are older, who maybe have more of those physical networks and also have the resources to participate physically as well. So addressing these challenges really takes intention, deliberate strategies to make electoral participation safe and inclusive. We really need to strengthen digital literacy. We really need to take away the fear. I don't know how we can do that. If I can get a magic wand and say we don't have to fear young people, they really mean well. Because of them, we exist. And we need to be intentional about creating safe spaces for youth engagement. But most importantly is that we need to resource for youth-led civic spaces as well. They are under-resourced, and that is why we see less mobilization, less participation as well. So we really need to call for a resourcing and partnership with youth-led civil societies. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Alice. And I think that the points that you made make for a nice segue to Elvis. And as I was thinking about what to ask Elvis, I was reflecting. So right now in Zambia, right now, I think about 2 or so weeks ago, there's a person who was arrested for disinformation after publishing a statement that alleged that the president had dissolved parliament, and I'm not sure what his fate is at the moment. But clearly, disinformation and misinformation are big deals in terms of the current environment. And both Alice and Koketso have given us some indications around some of the ways in which this is taking place. But Elvis, you eat digital, you breathe digital, you live digital. What other tactics are being used to repress people in general and young people specifically in the digital realm in relation to their participation and elections specifically?
Okay, thank you so much. As I start, as we have this conversation, I'm sure most, if not all of us here, are using social media. And you see, social media came about just as a platform for, just having entertainment, communication between friends, families, and colleagues, just as a platform where you can be able to get news, have fun. But also we've seen a surge in, political engagement, where people are now, keeping the leaders accountable, asking those very hard questions on social media. And it's really amazing. I know for us Kenyans, there's something called Kenyans on Twitter, KOT. I know now it's called X. And, this is a movement that is really feared globally. And even as we talk about all this, one of the things that also my the two speakers have talked about is disinformation. And when you talk about disinformation, even right now, disinformation during the election period is no longer random. We've seen a lot of coordinated, data-driven, emotional engineering suppression. And this brings about a lot of false information, just to be able to now, for example, it can be about voting dates, polling stations, or any other requirements that people use to be able to just suppress the turnout when it comes to election. Also, even when you talk about technology, in my opening remarks, I talked about deepfakes. These videos, even right now with the advent of AI, sometimes you come across a video, you look at it and you're like, is this really the right video? But now you really have to look at it with a keen eye to be able to know that this is a deep fake, maybe through just lip syncing or some other tactics that you might use. And you see, even right now with AI getting better and better, you never know, you might, in a few years to come or in a few months to come, you might look at a video and you might not know if it's really a deep fake, because now people are using these edited clips to be able to target some of these candidates that are running for political seats. And one of the examples I can give is during our 2017 elections, Cambridge Analytica came it came out there as one of the organizations that really used misinformation and disinformation to be able to manipulate our elections. You could come across an account called The Real Raila Odinga, but you look at the videos that were being put out there, you are like, hey, this cannot be. You see people use this misinformation and disinformation, one, to be able to bring about voter apathy, because you see, when young people see such things out there, they're like, there's no point for me to go out there and vote, probably my vote won't matter. And also, because of this, we see a lot of distrust in electoral bodies. Like, for example, ourselves, we are going for elections here in Kenya next year, and already there's so much talk and distrust in our electoral body, that is the IBC, Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. So people are really talking about it. They're like, is this commission even ready to be able to hold open, credible elections? So the distrust is very big. Also, we during that time, during the 2017, I'm using it as an example because we also saw a lot of post-election instability in the country. It was so bad that it took the former president to bring in the opposition leader for them to have a handshake so that the country can be able to be stabilized. So we've seen disinformation and misinformation can be a very big hindrance when it comes to ensuring that we are able to have our democratic rights. We are able to just have peaceful elections. We're able to just ensure that we are out there to vote and to be able to have all this. We've seen also a lot of surveillance and digital intimidation. Like 2024, we had our big protest here in Kenya, which came about because of the controversial finance bill. And you see, when people started having these conversations online, the government, first of all, was not really keen on, first of all, bringing down the finance bill. But at the same time, also, they thought that, people are just joking, people are just having this conversation online, and it will just be an online thing. Not knowing that, right now with the power of technology, people are using social media to communicate among themselves. People are using social media to be able to mobilize. Even when people were out there in the streets, they use social media to mobilize and tell each other, let's go out there and let's protest. we've seen a lot of digital activism. Right now we really don't have to go out there in the streets because we've seen a lot of aggressive forces by the police. When you go out there to do your activism, the police use a lot of force. And also we've seen a lot of civic education. You see, people really use the social media to be able to educate each other on the controversial clauses that they are out there, that were out there on the finance bill. And after this, we've seen a lot of monitoring of activists. In Kenya, there's something very common called the Subaru boys. Whenever you talk, you never know if you're gonna be picked and you're going to be thrown in the boot of the Subaru vehicles, because there's so much abductions. Once you talk, once you put a post out there, you're arrested because of this. We've been able to see intimidation of whistleblowers. You put information out there on what is happening. You're intimidated. We've seen even tracking of these protest mobilizers, the ringleaders. They're intimidated. They are being abducted, and it's something that it's really worrying, because you see, even for abduction, we've even seen instances where even people from other countries are being abducted here in Kenya, like the example of the Tanzanian activists who was abducted here in Kenya. We've seen the example of the opposition leader in Uganda, Besigye, being abducted here in Kenya. And it's a really worrying trend, not only here in Kenya, but we've seen it happening in Africa a lot, and even across the world. So because of this, also we've seen there's a reduced youth participation because of intimidation. Young people right now, they wouldn't talk as boldly as they would have talked back then, because the fear of being abducted. Also, we've seen a lot of silence on civil society voices. Right now, even civil society cannot just come out there and defend people as how they used to do back then, because there's this fear of being deregistered. There's being fear of the government attacking you, and so even them, they have just taken a step back, and they're like, we'd rather just watch and not take part in this. And also, I'm happy that also Alice has spoken something very profound on targeted gendered digital violence. And also here in Kenya, we are going towards our election next year. And this has been a very hot topic that people have been talking about, because we've seen women candidates across Africa. There's so much smear campaigns aimed at discouraging them from running or even speaking publicly. And because of this, we've seen many of them withdrawing from public debate, because of the shame that has come from some of these smear campaigns that are being targeted towards them. We've seen the psychological harm that comes with it, not only just towards them, but, even towards their immediate family members, their friends associated with them. There's also a reduced diversity in political leadership. Here in Kenya, as you know, we have one of the most progressive constitutions, and we have the 2/3 gender rule. And even as we do all our elections and we get leaders coming in, we've never even actualized this 2/3 gender rule. And in fact, even in the last election, 2017, the last parliament, the parliament was called by the Chief Justice that the parliament was supposed to be dissolved because the 2/3 gender rule was not attained. So we've seen so many young women shying away from politics because of the online trolling, the online smear campaigns that they have to face. And it's really worrying, and also it's something that we really need to just see how we can be able to just come around this, and also just see how we can be able to protect them. And one of the things that has also come in very strongly and very worrying is the internet shutdown. Elections in Uganda happened early this year, and the government just came out and said we are shutting down the internet. There's nothing you can do about it. Last year, same thing with Tanzania. 2024, even during our protest here in Kenya, for as much as we had internet, but people could not even access they could not go online and do anything with that internet. So the impact of this is, and also you see, because of social media, we've seen a lot of digital journalism, because you see right now the world is transitioning from traditional media to the new age media, and the digital journalism is now one of the things that is really coming out strongly. And because of such things like internet shutdown, we've seen the suppressing of independent reporting. So you can imagine now, if the internet is shut down, how can people be able to report what is happening? Even for election monitoring, when you shut down internet, the government is very bold to just rig elections and do whatever they want, because you cannot access internet. There's nothing that you can be able to do if you cannot access internet. But also at the same time, also we have businesses that are disrupted because they depend on the internet. So if you shut down internet, then there's so much that is not happening around the election period, and also isolation of citizens during this democratic moment. This is the time where citizens are supposed to be really together. There's one thing that I usually say, democracy means dialogue. And you see, the moment we stop talking, that's when we start fighting. So it's a high time where we really need to come strong and ensure that let's work together. Let's ensure that we don't get things like the internet shutdown, and also we don't get to see voices being suppressed on digital spaces. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for those reflections, Elvis. I think yeah, I'm glad that this is a trailer to the substantive conversations that we're supposed to have on the 26th, because there's clearly a lot to discuss and to deal with. You raised a number of issues, right, and including throttling, including internet shutdowns, the online harassment of female politicians in the main, the isolation of all of these are big challenges that face us, especially during elections, but generally as Africans. And I was wondering whether Koketso could have some reflections around that, because I recall from the introductory remarks, she was taking us all over the continent. So we've heard about the Kenyan challenges, which are also African challenges. How have people in Nigeria, how have people in Tanzania and South Africa been able to deal with some of these challenges? Is there a way of dealing with some of these challenges, Koketso?
That question makes me turn to Kenya, actually. So one of the things I remember was, and this happens quite frequently, when elections happen and young people aren't registered, young people don't go vote, there's a lot of think pieces about the apathy of young people. And so I remember from Kenya specifically, when President William Ruto was elected in, there was, young people are apathetic and. Now, in June 2024, in response to the proposed finance bill that was going to put in place punitive taxes, right, targeting essential goods like bread, sanitary products, and digital services, we saw the activity that happened then, people responded, young people in particular. And what that reminds us of, and I think Patrick Gattara in particular, the cartoonist and writer, says it very well. They are demonstrating that the essence of democracy isn't necessarily the ability to take control of the state via elections, but rather the ability to hold it to account and make it serve the people in the years between elections. And I think why that matters for me in particular, or is an inspiration for me, President Ruto's campaign was effectively about how things would be easier for the people. He would take care of the cost of living. And then this was the action that he undertook, him and his government undertook. And there was an immediate response to it. And that's important. There was a consequence. And we know that there was a crackdown and some of the difficulties and challenges that have been faced. But I think, again, for me, what is very, very powerful is that it is an illustration of democracy at work. Consequences. When something happens, this is what we expect from you. This is how you campaign, despite having initially been described as apathy. And with that said, I just want to bring in another thing from Kenya, obviously. So one of the things that I think keeps me kind of going, and I think we've seen it in so many different places, with that being only one example. I remember in 2020, during the 30th anniversary of the pro-democracy Saba protest, right? Wanjira, she said, when we lose our fear, they lose their power. I found that so powerful. It was a call to courage. It was a call to embody democracy. It was a call to so many things. It was a call against inequality. It was a call to remind us of who is the heartbeat of the people. We, in fact, are, you know? And so, yeah, that will be my closing thought, that with which I respond to you. But very, very fantastic examples right there.
Thanks a lot, Koketso. Alice, perhaps you can move us away from Kenya and reflect on are there any solutions out there to the challenges that Elvis placed on the table? Of particular interest to me, and which I would like to challenge you to reflect on as a feminist, is this issue of the online trolling, bullying, and victimization of young women or women who decide to participate in the political processes. How do we counter that? Is there a way of doing it, of countering that culture of abuse that we're seeing online in and around elections and in between elections? And do you have any other thoughts or examples of how young people have responded to some of the challenges that have been placed on the table, the internet throttling, the shutdowns, and the huge amount of challenges that Elvis placed on the table?
Yeah, so when you ask about the women one, I would not think about the first thing that popped into my head, for the fear of being accused of being a violent person. No, but so firstly is that we need electoral reform, right? So in Zambia, for example, we have now a bill that now it's a law, a change in our constitution that would designate more seats for women, right? Great. But it's also lacking a very key law, which is a whole electoral reform law, right? Which will dictate that women in politics are resourced, that they are safeguarded as well. But then it also puts accountability on the political parties to look after their well-being, right? Both physical and mental as well. It's not just on them. So that's very key as well. We need those structures, that legal framework, but also including in terms of cybersecurity as well. Luckily, we also now have a new cybersecurity bill that's in effect as well, that now gives a lot of people, but more so women who are being harassed and bullied, specifically women in politics, but any woman who can report it to the police as well. But we need to see more enactment. We need to see more resourcing around that. But then we also need to see more resourcing around women-led feminist civil society movements. A lot of it is patriarchal notions that are really enshrined in our communities. But for the most part, women know how to break it down. They know how to stop the patriarchy or eat the patriarchy. Right. And they know how to advocate for themselves, but they're not resourced. So we need to see more resourcing around that as well. In terms of young people and the challenges that are there, I go back to saying, in Zambia, when we had our first internet shutdown, I hope it's our first and last. We saw the use of VPNs. I don't think they did a very good job because VPNs worked and they were able to share that across the board with everyone. We also saw community and physical mobilization as well, but then also peer-to-peer exchanges and and practices. I remember a lot of young people in Zambia being able to get support from other young people within our region, but globally as well, to put pressure on our government, because that's the first time it had happened. And to be honest, we didn't believe that it would happen. So that coalition building as well, that is there to like put pressure on our governments so that they could rescind that decision. So I believe after 2 days, that internet shutdown was lifted as well. So yeah, it's really making sure that we see that collaboration very key at all levels between youth networks, understanding that they will be very innovative. And I think it's for people to realize that young people, women, men, adolescents, girls, boys are very innovative. Your barriers will not work. We'll just climb over them and climb over them as well. So the solution to that is just bring them to the table as well, right? And make sure that we see more civic participation from them at all levels. Our electoral commissions of Zambia, do they have youth advisory boards? Do they have young people within their boards? I mean, look at the demographic of Africa. Most of the elections that are coming up, that will be your main those will be your main clients. Have you designed yourself in a way that you're able to meet the electoral needs so that they don't feel they have to go to maybe civic disobedience as well? More going back to the reform around political parties as well. Let's see more of that reform and see meaningful inclusion of young people and women in our political parties and structures so that they can inform how we can embrace these groups into the work that we do, right? And into our political parties so that they don't have to go for alternative recourse. So mainly for me, it's resourcing, legal framework, ensuring implementation, breaking down patriarchal norms, which includes social behavior change, community dialogues at all level, and then making sure that consequences for people who break the law. It also shouldn't be the norm that you can harass someone, even though the law says it's not legal, but you get away with it because it's like a joke that everyone makes. So we have to see implementation of those policies as well. Those are my quick reflections. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Alice. And we are running out of time for this conversation, colleagues. And I did say, and Elisenda mentioned that this is a trailer. So the movie is coming to Kenya on the 26th of this month. Get in touch with Nuru Trust. Get in touch with Youth for SDGs Kenya. Secure your participation in the conversation. But I'm glad that we have had a good taste and teaser around what the conversation can look like. I'm wondering whether I can trust my panel with closing remarks for a minute each. Yeah, I don't know what to do, but perhaps let me do that. Elvis, you started a lot of conversations, and some of the questions have been answered. Some thoughts have been proffered on some of these. Do you have any parting shots in a minute around how we can move forward in terms of dealing with some of the huge amount of challenges that you talked about? There are questions that are untouched around how we can use social media beyond mobilization. I know in Nepal, young people were using it to present alternative forms of government using Discord. So it's not just for mobilizing, but presenting alternatives. Young people in Kenya have done tremendously as well. From the elections that have taken place over the last year or two, do you have anything that you think we need to hold on to in a minute? So now, Elvis, then Koketso, Alice, and then we end the conversation.
Okay, thank you so much, and amazing insights from my panelists. So one thing I want to say is it's high time for us to be able to come up with our own local solutions for our own local problems. Yes, for as much as we are using all these social platforms, the Twitter, X, Instagram, Facebook, and all these other platforms for engagement, it's high time. It's unfortunate that we don't have our own platform, as Africa. So it's high time that we are supposed to now build our own local solutions for our own local problems, because we cannot wait for people to build our own solutions. So it's high time for us to be able to build our own platforms. Let us be builders and not just consumers. So amazing conversation. Looking forward to meeting you guys in Kenya. Karibu Kenya. And thank you for this amazing opportunity.
All right. Thanks a lot, Elvis. Koketso, your parting shot.
Building open and democratic societies, right, is going to require that we're not only like caught up in the past looking forward, but vigilance in the moment, right? So that we can make sure that the mechanisms that are used to shut down civic space that are put in place in elections do not become permanent. We know that elections are a gateway towards permanence, and so vigilance, deep vigilance is required. And again, to repeat, when we lose our fear, they lose their power. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Koketso. And that's a good segue to Alice, who was struggling with the question of fear and how to deal with it, lose it and gain your power. Your parting shots, Alice.
That's true. To jump onto that, with everything in our societies, whether it's economically, whether it's socially, we're not going anywhere without the power of youth, and that includes our democratic spaces. Continuous protection of those civic space throughout the entire electoral cycle is so important. And a key driver of that, as we've seen, is young people. So we need to make sure that we bring them closer as well. They're really the answer to everything great that happens in this world. And we have to make sure that we remove all barriers to their participation. So I wish you all the best in Kenya during the movie as well. I'm sure it will be wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Alice. Colleagues, it's been a great trailer. Eli, Oyugi, and other colleagues who wanted to input into this conversation, I'm so sorry we have run out of time, but I'm hoping that the conversation has sufficiently whetted your appetite to continue the conversation in Kenya. I see resources have been shared around how to register for that process. And I'm sure that colleagues at Nuru Trust and Youth for SDGs are making provisions and ensuring that people who want to participate can do so both in person, which is preferable, and perhaps online. So thank you so much, guys, for your intellectual investment into the conversation. It has been an illuminating debate, and I'm sure a conversation starter of conversations that we can be able to carry forward in the second dialogue that is supposed to take place pre-Kenya and in Kenya itself on the 26th. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you. What's the next one?
Just